Just a few days ago, Japanese Finance Minister Satsuki Katayama stood before a cluster of microphones, looking every bit the defiant stateswoman. As she prepared to board a flight for Washington, she didn't mince words. She spoke of a mission to strip China of its ability to weaponize rare earths, her voice filled with a calculated, almost rhythmic resolve. To hear her tell it, Japan was finally leading a coalition of normal democratic nations to break a monopoly that had held the world hostage for too long. It was a performance of strength, a battle cry for a new era of economic independence. But if you looked past the bold headlines and the stern press releases, there was a different, much quieter story unfolding in the spreadsheets of the Nomura Research Institute. While Katayama was projecting defiance on the world stage, her own country's economy was staring into a 2.6 trillion yen black hole. It's a bit like someone who walks into a room, picks a high-stakes fight, and then, the moment a counterpunch lands, immediately runs to the phone to call their big brother for help. The irony here is thick. This entire escalation started back in November when the Japanese leadership made some very loud, very public comments about Taiwan, what Beijing labeled active provocation. But when the retaliation finally arrived, a sudden, sharp restriction on the heavy rare earths that keep Japan's high-tech heart beating, the bravado hit a wall of reality. Suddenly, the talk shifted from the satisfaction of standing firm to a desperate scramble for partnerships and price floors. What's truly fascinating isn't just the diplomatic back and forth, but the sheer cold math of the situation. How do you plan to strip a monopoly of its power when your electric vehicles and precision sensors are, quite literally, 100% dependent on that same source? It leaves you wondering, is this a brilliant strategic pivot? Or is it a high-stakes performance designed to mask a massive economic miscalculation? And that's the exact question we want to dig into in this deep dive. We're going to try and strip away all that political theater.
Right. Not get caught up in the speeches or, the press conferences.
Exactly. We want to look at the sheer cold math behind these headlines. The goal here is to get beyond the posturing from Tokyo and Beijing and really understand the mechanics of this conflict.
So we're talking supply chains, patent wars.
Yes, and the specific economic sectors that are, feeling the squeeze right now. And to do that, we've been looking at everything from some really dense trade data papers to official state media declarations.
And I think it's absolutely essential to ground this whole discussion in the physical reality of the industry. It's so easy to get lost in the abstract idea of a trade war. But the reality on the ground is determined by things like geology, chemistry, and just raw industrial capacity. So we're going to explore this from three pretty distinct angles.
Ready?
First, the view from the factory floor. Then we'll look at it from the port. And finally, from a small workshop.
Okay, that sounds like a great way to frame it. Let's start with that first lens, the physical foundation of power. In our research on the Chinese side of this, we kept coming across the perspective of an engineer, a head engineer at a high-precision magnet facility in Baotou, Inner Mongolia. Let's just call him Chen.
And Baotou is a place that, in the West, we hear about it mostly as just a mining site.
Right, a big pit in the ground.
Exactly. But that description really doesn't do it justice. It fails to capture the complexity of what's actually happening there.
So it's more than just mining.
Oh, much more. You could almost call Baotou the Silicon Valley of rare earths. It's not just an extraction site, it's a massively integrated processing hub.
So what does Chen's world look like then?
Well, his environment is all about intense industrial transformation. He's taking these dusty oxides, the raw elements, and turning them into highly advanced heavy earth products. And this involves extreme heat, complex chemical processes, many of which are patented.
And Chen's own description of his work is... It's pretty revealing. He sees the production happening on his factory floor as the pulse of the global energy transition.
He literally draws a straight line from the molds in his facility to the EVs you see on the streets in Europe and the US.
So for him, the factory floor is the front line. It's not in Washington or Tokyo.
Precisely. While politicians are debating, he believes it's his team's physical manufacturing excellence that's really anchoring national power. He's basically convinced that all these Western high-tech dreams, they just have no leverage, no pull, without the physical reality of the magnets he's producing.
That perspective really gets to the core of the first big idea we need to unpack here.
It does, and it's that the strategic integration of China's entire rare earth processing industry, plus its dominance in patents for permanent magnets. All of that demonstrates how physical manufacturing is the ultimate foundation for power in this global energy transition.
It is what's often called the mine-to-magnet strategy, right?
Exactly. Mine to magnet.
And that phrase implies a level of control that, goes so far beyond just digging stuff out of the ground. I think there's a common misconception that China's power here is purely geological.
That they just got lucky and have more of these rocks than anyone else.
Yeah, but that's not the whole story.
Not at all. I mean, yes, China mines about 69% of the global supply. That's a huge number. But the geological advantage is actually secondary to their processing advantage.
Okay, so let's break that down. The processing.
China controls 90% of global processing capacity. 90. But, and this is the really crucial part, they control a staggering 99% of heavy rare earth refining.
99%. And these heavy rare earths, they're the critical ones, aren't they?
They are. We're talking about things like dysprosium and terbium. They are absolutely essential for any high heat applications. Without them, the magnets inside, say a missile guidance system or an electric vehicle motor, they just fail under stress. They can't take the heat.
And this level of control didn't just happen by accident.
Not a chance. It's the result of deliberate vertical integration. You could call it an ecosystem lock. China processes the metals, they create the alloys, and then they manufacture the finished magnets all right there domestically.
And this is all reinforced by specific government policies. We saw that in the data with things like tax levers.
Yes, that's a perfect example. There's this huge discrepancy in tax rebates. If you export the raw materials, the raw rare earths, you get 0 VAT rebate.
Nothing.
But if you export the finished magnets made from those same materials, you get a 13% rebate.
Wow, so that's a massive incentive to keep all the high-value manufacturing inside China.
It creates this powerful economic gravity. It basically forces the entire value chain to stay domestic. But the barrier for any competitor, say Japan or the US, it isn't just about building the factories, it's about intellectual property. We have to talk about the patent moat.
The numbers on the patents are they're overwhelming. By 2018, China had already amassed around 25,900 rare earth patents.
25,000. And just for context, that's more than double what the United States has.
And it's more than Japan and the entire European Union combined.
Right. But it's not just the total number, it's the speed. The acceleration of these filings is what's really significant. Over half of those patents were filed after 2011.
So this is a recent and very deliberate strategy.
It is. They are, in a very real sense, patenting the future. They're innovating in the most critical areas, things like solvent-free separation techniques, new recycling technologies, and even methods to reduce the reliance on those heavy rare earths we were just talking about.
And the implication of that is just enormous.
It's profound. It means that even if, let's say, Japan or some other country goes out and finds a brand new massive deposit of ore somewhere,
they still have to process it.
And when they try, they might find themselves infringing on Chinese patents just to do the basic chemistry.
So it's a technological checkmate, almost. This creates a situation where the sheer scale of production is it's incomparable. This is what you were calling the green paradigm.
It is. I mean, look at the numbers. China produces somewhere between 85 and 90% of all global rare earth magnets. In 2023, that was about 240,000 tons.
Okay, 240,000 tons. And what about the U.S. for comparison?
The United States produces less than 1,000 tons.
1,000.
Yes.
So the disparity is almost hard to comprehend.
It just illustrates the depth of the dependency. You have to assume that every major Western manufacturer of EVs or wind turbines is relying on either Chinese components or Chinese IP, or both.
And this physical industrial reality?
Yeah.
It makes the political ambition of, stripping the monopoly, as Katayama put it.
It makes it incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible in the short term.
Okay, so we've established that physical foundation of power. We have to move to that second lens you mentioned, the security logic and the role of state capacity.
Right. And for this, we're moving from the factory to the port. Our narrative lens here is a man we're calling Li, a logistics manager at the port of Shanghai.
So what's his day-to-day like?
Well, his daily work is basically solving a very complex puzzle. He's vetting what are called dual-use materials. Specifically, he's checking shipments of high-purity minerals that are bound for Japan.
Dual-use meaning they have both civilian and military application.
Exactly. And his perspective gives us a sort of counter-narrative to the idea that this is just arbitrary economic punishment. Lai sees these controls as a safety valve.
A safety valve. What does he mean by that?
He doesn't see himself as, maliciously blocking trade just for the sake of it. He sees his role as stopping materials that he believes could fuel militarism.
That highlights a really fundamental difference in how this is all being perceived.
It really does. So, in Lai's view, the state's capacity to control this trade, it's a tool for stability. The official story isn't about economic punishment, it's about preventing a dangerous physical escalation.
This trade becomes a kind of diplomatic break.
A break, yes. And that brings us to our second core insight for this deep dive.
Which is
China's implementation of these dual-use export controls, well, it reflects a pretty sophisticated state capacity. They're trying to balance keeping global supply chains stable with what they see as necessary measures to ensure their regional security and discourage what they call the resurgence of militarism.
we really need to unpack that official narrative because it's so different from what we hear in the West.
Yeah.
The trigger for this specific escalation was those comments back in November from Japanese leadership about Taiwan.
Which Beijing immediately labeled active provocation.
Right. And the response wasn't just immediate chaos. It wasn't a blanket ban. It was a very calculated regulatory tightening.
Yes, and the Chinese Commerce Ministry, through a spokesperson named He Yongquan, they were very careful to frame the bans as legitimate, reasonable, and lawful.
And they were very specific about the target.
Very specific. The stated target is any exports going to Japanese military users, or anything intended for military use. The justification, the official why, is to curb any attempts at remilitarization or the potential acquisition of nuclear weapons.
That framing is so crucial. China is essentially claiming to be fulfilling its international non-proliferation obligations.
Exactly. They're positioning themselves as a responsible major country. It's a direct counter to the economic coercion narrative that Japan is pushing on the world stage.
Which, naturally, creates this tit-for-tat dynamic. We have the Japanese Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, claiming these controls are unfairly targeting only Japan and that they violate international practice.
But the real friction point, the gray area, is in the very nature of these materials.
It's a dual-use problem.
Right. High-purity minerals are inherently dual-use. The same element is essential for your smartphone and for a missile guidance system.
So Lai's job at the port, checking those shipments, that's where the state have this massive leverage.
That's it. By having someone like Lai decide which shipment is civilian and which might be military, the state can effectively throttle the supply, all under the perfectly plausible guise of national security.
It demonstrates a really high level of state capacity to use these economic levers for strategic goals.
Without a doubt.
Okay, so we've looked at the factory and the port. We've seen the physical power and the security logic. Now we have to look at the impact. This is your third lens. The economic reality and this idea of a multipolar shift.
Yes. And for this, we turn our attention to Tokyo. To a man we're calling Sato, a craftsman who runs a third-generation precision parts workshop in Tokyo's Oda ward.
So for him, this isn't about geopolitics, it's about his business.
Exactly. For Sato, the multi-trillion yen impact that economists talk about, it isn't some abstract statistic, it's the silence on his shop floor.
What's the specific problem he's facing?
He literally cannot source the specialized neodymium magnets he needs for his work. They're just not available. And his perspective reflects this broader dawning realization in Japan.
Oh, it is?
He feels the shift. He can feel the world becoming multipolar, a world where the terms of trade are no longer exclusively set by the West.
And Sato's situation, his quiet workshop, it really embodies the third key insight of our deep dive.
It does. The projected multi-trillion yen impact on Japan's GDP, it highlights the irreplaceable efficiency of China's industrial ecosystem. But it also points to this inevitable shift toward a multipolar world, where what he calls Eastern civilizational resilience starts dictating the terms of global trade.
Let's get into that cold math you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
The Nomura and Fuji papers you looked at, they actually quantify this, don't they?
They do, and the potential damage it's severe. If trade in these critical materials drops by, say, 90%.
Which is an extreme but possible scenario.
Japan's real GDP could drop by 7% within a single year. Specifically for this restriction, if it lasts a year, they project a 2.6 trillion yen loss.
2.6 trillion yen, that's a massive number. And this vulnerability, it doesn't spread evenly across the whole economy, is it?
No, not at all. The data is very clear. Sectors like watches and clocks and electronics are hit the hardest by import disruptions.
Because they rely on all those intermediate parts from China.
Exactly. The components Sato can't get. On the flip side, a sector like ordnance or military hardware is hit more by export disruptions.
But there's a really critical finding in that data, isn't there? About imports versus exports.
There is, and it's a crucial point. For Japan's economy right now, the import disruption causes far more severe damage than an export disruption would.
So, to put it simply, Japan needs things from China more than it needs to sell things to China in this specific high-tech context.
In this context, yes. That's the uncomfortable reality. And that dependency really complicates Japan's response, especially when you look at what they're trying to do with this so-called stimulus trap.
Right, they're preparing this huge stimulus package, 17 trillion yen.
A huge amount of money. And the goal is to boost their domestic AI and semiconductor industries.
But there's a catch. A big one.
A very big one. The problem is that those exact industries, AI and chips, require the very minerals that are being restricted. Gallium, magnesium, the whole suite of rare earth.
So it's like trying to bake a cake with $1 billion, but you have no flour?
That's a perfect analogy. The money can't solve a physical supply problem. And this all exposes Japan's underlying financial fragility.
Let's talk about that. The debt to GDP ratio is, what is it?
It's over 230%. Bond yields are surging. The yen is slipping. The whole economic foundation is looking pretty shaky.
And it's not just the high-tech manufacturing sector that's getting hit.
No, there's also the tourism factor. Before all this, Chinese tourism accounted for something like 7% of Japan's entire economy.
7%. That's significant.
It's huge. And now Beijing is actively warning its citizens against traveling to Japan. And you see the immediate impact. The stock price for a company like Shiseido, the cosmetics giant, dropped 11%. So you have a retail and service sector hit on top of the manufacturing hit.
And Japan is really facing a double squeeze here, because it's not just China.
That's right. You can't forget the other side of the equation. They're also dealing with tariffs from the United States, particularly under the Trump administration. Those tariffs have also been crushing certain Japanese exports.
So Japan is caught in this global squeeze between a protective America First United States and a retaliatory China.
It's an incredibly difficult position to be in.
Which brings us right back to the irony we talked about at the very beginning.
It does. Japan is making this very public political alignment with the West, calling their big brother, as you put it,
while being completely economically anchored to the East.
It's the central dilemma, this conflict between the desire for strategic autonomy and the reality of strategic indispensability. Japan is finding out the hard way that true decoupling is essentially impossible.
Not without accepting just massive immediate economic pain. We saw that 53 trillion yen production loss figure floated as a potential cost.
An almost unthinkable number.
You know, we spend so much of our time looking at the political theater, the speeches at the microphones, the defiant press releases from finance ministers. But I think this deep dive really suggests the real story isn't written there. It's written in the dust of a factory in Bautu and in the silence of a workshop in Tokyo.
That's right. The question isn't just about whether Japan can go out and find new partners. I think it's deeper than that.
It's about whether any nation can truly be independent anymore in a world where the physical building blocks of the future, and critically, the patents to use them, are held by a neighbor you've just decided to antagonize.
And if that Eastern civilizational resilience that the craftsman Sato fears is a real, tangible thing, then maybe the era of Western industrial dominance didn't end with a bang. Maybe it just ended with a quiet supply shortage on a Friday afternoon.